Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Friday. Woo! We made it to Friday, October 18th, 2024. I'm just having difficulty focusing on the screen well enough to tell you what the date is. I'm old and I'm running for president, and you should all vote for me. Okay. Wow. Well, time to round things up for the week, close it out, as it were, and, head into the weekend, which I'm sure will be, well, I'm not as sure anymore. Usually, I was commenting earlier this week that in one of the, might even have been this morning's post, I don't know, everything feels like a Friday now, and I guess it has to do with the jam-packed week of campaign events, except... and ordinarily at this point we'd probably be saying, oh, well, Donald Trump will ruin our weekend with fascist rhetoric and make us all worry, rightly, I think, about the future of the country and, whether we should stay here if he somehow seizes power, et cetera, et cetera. You have to entertain these thoughts, even though Kamala Harris seems to be doing just fine and we all hold out hopes for a big blowout election. But... ordinarily at this time, he would be disrupting our lives and reminding us just how disruptive he actually is and how much we can't afford to have him, even in a position to claim that he won in any state, really. But, well beyond certainly beyond the red firewall states. But he is slowing down dramatically, and it's becoming clear that his ability to disrupt things is diminishing. So I guess I'm sort of looking forward to perhaps a quieter weekend, although he can still, disrupt things from his perch on Truth Social, and I guess now he can leverage Twitter as well, which is pretty much open to him for his own manipulation. But in terms of public appearances that actually drive opinion and where people actually see him and react to him, I think maybe we're at the end of that period of the election for him. As a matter of fact, let's see, did I not put this thing into Pocket? I don't know. I thought I pressed the right buttons as I was exiting, but I was just reading right up until the beginning of our own show, Empty Wheel's latest, or at least I think her latest. Let's transfer it over to Pocket so that it's easier to read on the big screen, and we can let the little screen do the work of timing the show for us. But she does a weekly wrap up, I should say, of the week's events with Nicole Sandler on her show. I did not know this. It does say at the beginning of the piece here, as you know, which I don't know, but as you regular readers of Empty Wheel know, Nicole Sandler and she do a wrap up of the week every Friday. I don't know if it's necessary to give you the details of when they tape, but if you're a regular listener of Nicole Sandler's show, then you know this and you are tuning in. What is interestingly, she says, just as we do here on the show, she says it may show, but I usually walk into those recordings with no sense of what happened during the previous week. That sounds familiar. These weeks have all been so momentous for so long that they've felt like a year running into the next one. A familiar feeling, I would say. This week, though, I think it important to assess the week as a whole, because I think it's possible, she says, that events of the week will have a substantive change on the results of the election. No promises, but it is possible. Start with the baseline. We've been there all week talking about it. The race is statistically tied in all 7 swing states. The race is close to tied nationally. If nothing happens, the race will be determined by 2 things. First, which side can get more of its voters to the polls? And second, how much Trump's expected, we'll say, F-ery can thwart the actual vote from being counted. At this stage, all we know is that people are voting. Jimmy Carter, as noted earlier, a record number of early votes in Georgia, and even people from the hardest hit areas of North Carolina stood in line and voted in strong numbers yesterday. There are promising signs of greater than historic early vote from women, though Trump's men could, of course, come in late. Nevada's Clark County has still not posted the bulk of the votes there, so it's too early to tell if the Republican narrowing of registration, it says here, in Las Vegas can swing the election. I don't see any link for that one. There's a link for the Clark County vote posting, or the non-posting, but so I'm not positive. Are we talking about a narrowing of the registration gap in Las Vegas, that is more Republicans registering in Clark County, Nevada these days? Or are we talking about Republican narrowing of registration, like culling the voter rolls as they're doing in so many other states, and throwing what they suspect to be Democrats off the registration rolls? But I think it's actually the former rather than the latter in Clark County. At any rate, Arizona early turnout has been 44% Republican as compared to 33% Democratic, but the abortion referendum may affect how even Republicans vote. That's a good reminder. If it's Republican women in particular showing up to vote early, yes, they're Republicans, but no, they are maybe not going to the polls with their husbands. This is a big deal in this election in particular. We mentioned the other day the memory of Donald Trump peeking over at Melania to, like, I don't know what, monitor her casting of her ballot. And somebody on Blue Sky was just asking about that the other day. Doesn't anybody remember that? It seems so odd because now the Harris campaign finds itself, I'm sure they're pleased to do it, but they feel, I'm sure they also feel like it's a shame that we're forced to do this, but trying to reach out to women voters and saying, hey, remember, it's a secret ballot. Even if you go to early voting, and if you're not filling it out by mail where your husband can look over your shoulder, you get a little booth. Nobody knows who you voted for. There's even privacy screens for submitting your ballot at the Scantron readers. Of course, there's ways that husbands can meddle in your work anyway. But this is a recurring theme that they're trying to reach out to, or having to reach out to women and say, you can cast a vote that's different from your husband. And a big viral social media clip of an 80-something-year-old woman casting her ballot for the first time, noting that she never voted for because her husband didn't think she should. No further explanation than that in the text that I saw, but certainly an interesting and moving video clip. But now he has passed away, and so she's on her way to the polls to vote. I thought that was rather interesting. Let me see if I can have a note or two about the video. Let's see, 81-year-old. And let's see if I can search that up for you if you, by chance, have not seen it. So where were we with Empty Wheel? Telling us, yes, it's just too early to tell at this point. But as for the effery, or as we might say on this show, the I'm sort of approximating what it sounds like if the censoring horn is truly effective at blocking out what I'm saying. Well, in Georgia, at least, there's been some pushback against efforts to disrupt certification, including, again, from Republicans. We read about that the other day. The judges there blocking the efforts of Republicans to allow themselves the latitude to refuse to certify the votes, with the judge coming down on the side of, nope, it's mandatory. I don't know how he'll deal with it if they just won't put pen to paper. He might issue a writ of mandamus, true. They might still refuse, true. He might jail them for contempt of court, true. But how will he get their pen to paper? And it may be that judges in the end are willing to say, well, as it is mandatory, I will order it deemed certified. I don't know whether anybody's going to be willing to do that or not, though. That's still a real open question for me, although maybe there's answers in the judge's orders, and we should take a look at them. At any rate, in Georgia, as she mentions, some pushback against this efforts to disrupt certification. NBC has done an update of how Trump deliberately stoked tensions at the TCF counting center in Detroit. An update, I guess I should look at that. And how Trump is training vote observers to do so again. Most counties in Michigan, however, will count early votes ahead of time. That's good news. And I heard from Greg on Wednesday that even Pennsylvania has new rules about that, so that will be helpful, I think, in making it more difficult for Donald Trump to set up his usual claims, or at least the 2020 claims, over again. Meanwhile, Republicans and one gambler who might be a certain South African billionaire are using voting markets to create the illusion that Trump is winning, right? They've gone to the betting markets, and ordinarily the value, if there is any, to the betting markets predicting the election is that people put money on the line, actual dollars, and if you bet wrong, you'll lose that money, and if you bet right, you'll win the money. And money matters to people. If you are a certain South African billionaire who has so much that the money doesn't matter, then you can bet exorbitant amounts of money for anybody else and make it look like you seriously believe that Trump will win the election with your dollars, knowing that it's a calculated loss. What I'm doing here is I'm willing to throw $100,000 in the garbage to make it look like many, many betting people really, truly believe in Trump's chances. And then you will see on the betting markets, you'll see what the trends are, and you'll go and you'll say, all right, everybody's sort of putting their money there. I feel better about that bet, whether that's a hedge or what. We don't know, but I feel better about that bet about Donald Trump. Or if they're not betting, they come away with an impression that, well, many, many more people believe that Trump will be winning the election than I thought. But in fact, it's just Elon Musk goosing the numbers because he doesn't care about losing $100,000 or however much he's betting. So that's interesting all by itself. They are, of course, using those markets to create the illusion that Trump is winning, which will stoke distrust if that turns out to be fake, the same way shoddy GOP polls did in 2020, right? If you create the illusion that you think, you as a voter think, okay, it's actually possible for Trump to win, and I am enthusiastic about that, and so are many, many other people, and we all think he's going to win, and he gets trounced, you'll say, this feels like it's rigged. It's the sort of thing that you can point to, even though it's not real evidence of anything, but you can always point to it and say, I feel cheated. It's a tied game, and Trump has tried to systematize the ways that he attempted to cheat in 2020. Now, before we turn with Marcy to whether events of the weeks might change that deadlock, consider why it's tied. And that's helpful because usually the newspapers will just say, well, it's tied and there's nothing we can tell you about that. Far be it from us to give you any analysis, even in this a column titled Analysis. But it's tied because 35 to 40% of likely voters are cult-like followers of Donald Trump. Those people live in a hermetically sealed world of his propaganda, short of cognitive collapse, and I would have to say total cognitive collapse. I mean, short of him actually having a stroke visibly in front of everybody and collapsing and being in a coma. But, all right, perhaps it's not, doesn't need to be that much. But short of cognitive collapse, none of these people will abandon their Donald, though a surprising number of them are not voters, and that is always amazing. But if you ever wondered what kind of a person could believe the sorts of things he says, like that January 6th was a peace and love day, peace and love, patriotic, yada, yada, or that, I don't know, whatever it is, women like me and, all the various lies, what kind of person could believe the most outrageous of them? The kind of person, I guess, who could say, Donald Trump's going to save America. Donald Trump is the best thing that ever happened to America. We're going to collapse if we don't have Donald Trump as president of the United States of America. But I'm also a sovereign citizen, and I'm afraid that if I vote, the international Jewish conspiracy will round me up and exterminate me, so I won't. Or my vote doesn't matter. Or God told me he'd fix it. Or what, those are the sorts of people who will believe almost anything, up to and including the kind of stupid beliefs you'd have to hold in your head simultaneously to believe so strongly in Donald Trump's leadership abilities all by itself, but then two, to say, but I'm not going to vote for him. I'm not going to I won't spend the time casting a ballot. What? Why? That doesn't make any sense. Right, but the predicate didn't make any sense. Well, guess what? There's a lot of people in the world, and there are people like that. How many of them? I don't know, but maybe we'll find out. Now, in addition to that, of course, it is tied also because 8 to 13% of voters, I'm not sure where the numbers are coming from exactly, but they're probably about what we've heard in the past or supposed in the past for this one. It's tied because 8 to 13% of voters believe a number of things that credit Trump with more success than he had and taint Kamala Harris with things she didn't do. They blame Biden for global post-COVID inflation for some justifiable and some unjustifiable reasons. They believe the economy is in worse shape than it is. They often forget how poorly Trump handled COVID. They may not know of Trump's epic corruption. Because of a number of changes in the media, they don't regularly access credible descriptions of the truth. Many of these people recognize that Trump is a horrible person, but because they credit him with successes he didn't earn, they're willing to vote for him anyway. That's an interesting problem. It's a small number, comparatively speaking, but 8 to 13% of the electorate, if that's even close to accurate, that's pretty sad. A significant chunk of these people can be motivated by the grievance politics that dominates the Trump cult, and that's why this year's election will significantly pivot on education levels. Trump's grievance politics are significantly based on his false claims to have been unfairly persecuted and his false claims never to have persecuted others. This dynamic is a big part of what, she says, I've been trying to explain in the Ball of Thread podcast. It's linked here, and if you haven't tuned in, you might want to give it a shot. The Ball of Thread podcast that Marcy, has been doing with everybody's social media friend, LOLGOP. So in short, the reason the U.S. is a knife's edge away from electing a fascist is significantly a media problem. Both the existence of the hermetically sealed world of Trump propaganda and the collapse and or abdication of credible media for other reasons. These people, or the people who would make this election a blowout loss for Trump, are often not accessing truthful information, like at all. I would add, I read an anecdote on Blue Sky, Marcy says, that exemplifies this. Someone chatting about voting with two guys who planned to vote for Trump, who believed that all his criminal cases had been dismissed, and who had no idea that Trump has been exhibiting signs of mental instability. And such a thing could happen, right? I mean, there were some cases that were ostensibly dismissed. We'll see whether they remain dismissed. But Eileen Cannon certainly just tried to dismiss these cases. Whether it sticks or not, we have yet to see. And, all Trump really has to do is walk around saying they've been dismissed or that I've been totally exonerated or, use the Bill Barr report and complain about Russia. You could just say it over and over again. And some people never access the information that, no, there are outstanding convictions for which he's going to be sentenced 2 weeks after the election, and that there's still a pending January 6th case in Washington, D.C. But not everybody knows who Judge Tanya Chutkan is, believe it or not. All right, so there was this, and it's a media thing, is what she's explaining here. Given that virtually no media outlets correct Trump's false claims about his criminal exposure, you can't expect voters to know better. And thus far, the press has sane-washed Trump's recent decline. 3 things happened this week that she says may chip away at this dynamic for key voting blocks. And those are Trump's meltdown in Oaks, Pennsylvania, the dance party, followed by a series of canceled events and poor showings. On October 7th, Trump canceled his 60 Minutes interview, leaving Kamala Harris a solo opportunity there. October 14th, Trump sways to the music for 39 minutes in Oaks, Pennsylvania, after giving word salad answers to the questions that he did take. On the 15th, it's the showdown with Bloomberg editor John Micklethwait, who savages Trump's economic plans, and Trump then cancels an appearance on CNBC's Squawk Box, a show that he loves calling into normally, but walked away from this time. On the 16th, Trump misses a few answers, but it was in a fluffed up Fox News town hall for women. And then he really blows the Univision town hall as well. We heard a little bit about that yesterday. And then yesterday itself, on the 17th, Trump pulls out of an October 22nd NRA event in Savannah, Georgia. Like not even feeling confident enough to go to an NRA event at this point. And then Trump, quote unquote, postpones a scheduled October 21st NBC interview. So it's not looking like he's really up to the closing moments. That's true. Then there's a list of things that she describes as cracks in the curtain of disinformation pulled across Trump's failures. October 10th, Harris appears at the Univision town hall on her own. October 15th, coverage of Harris's Charlemagne the God appearance. The podcast Charlemagne the God does, focusing on the label fascism. So a good, chunk of time there. I don't know how long that show is, but, good long focus with a popular podcaster on the fascism problem. October 16th, in a Fox interview, which we still haven't talked a great deal about. I don't really know how to digest this one, but Kamala Harris goes on Fox. You kind of have to at some point and make a demonstration of, yes, I'm willing to confront hostile media directly in a one-on-one situation. And you'll see what you chose to see in that interview. Fox News fans and Trump fans will see, she is just as stupid as everybody said, although it really is difficult to think of her, even with answers that they disagree with. They were cogent, right? They held together. I think a couple people probably did come away, probably more so than having their priors confirmed. They came away and said, well, she's not as dumb as Trump says she is, but I disagree with all her answers, and I really dislike her, and I believe Trump when he says she's a communist or what have you. But, yeah, all right, well, there was that. And then there was also the opportunity to push back on Fox. I don't know whether, again, it works with Trump fans and real Fox fans, but people saw the Fox interview. Harris calls out the use of a doctored clip of Trump attacking the enemies within and makes a reference to Mark Milley's attacks on Trump, though without using the word fascist for some reason. She also references all the Republicans, including former Trump aides, who've just appeared with her in Washington's Landing, and that is to say, at one of her many rallies in which she's rolling people out who are there to say, I am a Republican, a lifelong Republican. I even served in the Trump administration or worked closely with it. And I can see the problem even before we discuss his cognitive decline. And I am switching sides and endorsing Kamala Harris. On October 17th, CNN exposes the editing that Fox News did of the women's town hall. And Bret Baier confesses that they didn't show the actual enemy within part of the clip, but he puts the blame on himself, not Fox News in general. But yes, there was a very interesting exchange in the Fox News interview in which Baier is, and the whole thing is trying to do a gotcha question, but asking her, I don't even remember what the premise of the question was, but she is saying, if you look at his rhetoric, he's calling people enemies within, and he's going to deploy the military against his political opponents. And they tried to say, no, that wasn't really what he actually said or actually meant. Here, we'll take a look at a clip. And they showed, a spliced and diced clip in which it isn't clear from that version of the clip exactly what it is he's saying. And she pushes back. And I don't think she had the clip there available to play on the air. That really would have been something. That'd be a great demand to make of a Fox News interview. I want to be able to play our own countervailing video clips, but everybody had just seen this thing. It had just happened. And so within a day, you have CNN saying, well, here's what Fox News showed people Trump said, but here's the actual video of the actual event in its full context. And you could see very clearly, and Bret Baier, I guess, has now confessed as much, that they just showed a doctored clip, or at least a heavily edited clip. Anyway, there's also more. The likely release, she notes today, of the appendices behind Jack Smith's immunity brief. Last time we checked in on what was going on in Tanya Chutkin's court, we thought we were getting the follow-up to the week prior, but actually that was a separate development. But it was last week we were reading about the decision about when to release the redacted appendices that accompanied the big bombshell report that I spent 3 days reading to you. And that's scheduled for today. This might take up my weekend. I don't know how easy it is to read you an appendix, though, to the brief. They should probably really be read side by side. But all of these things have happened, and this last one still pending. I mean, it might be a big weekend event. So she wraps up here and says, to show why I think these developments might matter, she wants to go back to Ramiro Gonzalez, the man at the Univision, I'm just going to say Univision, like the rest of us do, the town hall, who asked Trump about January 6th. As this person, I'm not certain who, but Ms. Malarkey 24, as it turns out, posted on Twitter, Gonzalez actually asked the question at both Univision town halls, the one with Kamala Harris and the one with the other guy. What's his name that's running? Trump. Yes, you remember him. He asked Harris, mostly in Spanish, curiously enough, about rumors that the Biden administration wasn't serving Republicans in FEMA relief. And the clip is embedded here, though I won't have a chance to play it certainly before the break. But let's read what Marcy had to say about it. In Harris's response, she first asked if his family was okay, right? Like a normal person might do. Then she addressed the disinformation about FEMA recovery. She told her story about never asking as a prosecutor whether witnesses and victims were Republican or Democrat, but instead asked whether they were okay. Right? We have seen where people are playing politics and political games. She described Trump's deliberate attempt to suggest that the Biden administration was playing politics. You have a right to know that your government and its leaders are putting you first and not themselves. In the same appearance, Harris answered a question about whether she had been installed undemocratically by describing Trump's attack on the rule of law. She listed the Republicans who were supporting her. And, let me bring you the rest of this thought after this break.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We were right in the middle of reading Marcy Wheeler's latest, and I didn't check whether it's the absolute latest, but late enough for me anyway, and her wrap-up of the week and why she thinks this past week or so might be pivotal in changing the outcome of the election. We were reading specifically about the contrasting appearances on Univision by Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and noting that the guy who asked Donald Trump the question about January 6th was also present at the Kamala Harris appearance and asked a different question, but interesting one, but asking about whether or not the rumors were true that FEMA was somehow disproportionately, withholding aid from Republicans or Republican areas and concentrating only on Democrats. And she, of course, pointing out, one, that it's not true. Two, that as a prosecutor in her other public jobs, she's never asked anybody whether they were Democrat or Republican. She asked whether they were okay and how they needed help in prosecuting the case against their wrongdoers. And, and then making a show, of course, of letting everybody know, my first concern is, are you okay? Is there something that you need? Are you getting the services you need? But then explaining, yeah, you also have a right to know that your government and leaders are not doing this. Whereas, by the way, Donald Trump promises to do this and accuses, not only does he promise to do it, he says it's okay, and it's really just response to his accusation that Democrats are doing this. Democrats are not doing this. Nobody's doing this. He's fantasizing that it's happening and that it would be a good thing if he just explicitly made it happen. But anyway, back to her description. In the same appearance, Harris answered a question about whether she had been installed undemocratically. That another of Trump's claims. By the way, he's still out there complaining and demanding, I don't know to who and in what context, but he's out there demanding, no, they have to let Joe Biden have his rightful place back. I should still be running against Joe Biden. I'm not running against Kamala Harris. It's a lie. It's a Democratic lie. And any place that you see her on the ballot, everything's been rigged. That's part of his big plan to make claims that this election needs to be overturned. People were choosing between me and somebody that was undemocratically, inappropriately, illegally, unconstitutionally put on the ballot. Joe Biden is the real other choice, and if it's on your ballot that it's Kamala Harris, you can see how the game's being rigged. He's actually still making that claim. It's been months now. Anyway, as she says, she answers this question about whether she'd been installed undemocratically by describing Trump's attack on the rule of law. She listed the Republicans who were supporting her, including Alberto Gonzalez, who is, as Marcy notes, whatever else you might think of him, and trust me, I do, she says. Do what? Well, we know what she thinks of Alberto Gonzalez, so we'll trust that she thinks exactly what we think she thinks. But whatever you might think of him, he is one of the biggest success stories for a child of migrants in U.S. history, right? For your parents to have immigrated and under the circumstances of current Central and Latin American migration to come to this country, and then your son is the Attorney General of the United States. Well, that's kind of a big deal. And she described the mob on January 6th, and she stated that January 6th was one reason why Republicans were supporting her. Those answers were on October 10th. Less than a week later, Gonzalez, not Alberto Gonzalez, but what was this guy's name? Ramiro Gonzalez, the questioner, was back, noting explicitly, as he speaks to Trump, that he had been a registered Republican but was no longer registered as such. Gonzalez pitched his question as a chance for Trump to earn back his vote. I think Gonzalez sincerely wanted Trump to do so. Gonzalez asked about January 6th, about COVID response, and about Pence not supporting him anymore. And yes, I could play you these responses, and I think we played part of it, and I described for you the way Ramirez cocks his head to one side as he's watching the response, and then when there gets the response that January 6th was a day of peace and love, he huffily flips the cocked head to the other side, did you really just say that? And there were a lot of such reactions for Trump's appearance, as you might expect. But I'm going to jump right over it to Marcy's description and analysis here. Yes, this response was riddled with lies, but even basic ones like his claim that remember that we didn't have guns, and he lets it slip, that this was a we thing. January 6th. And, it kind of went unremarked upon right away because there were so many other things to point out. But we didn't have guns. All of these things, the basic ones, are going unchallenged even when journalists claim to fact-check these claims. Still, Trump also didn't answer the question, and that matters. He was asked about his inaction on January 6th, not why people came to D.C. He spoke instead about how many people wanted to hear him speak. Right? So again, not answering the question, which is good nuance, but I would urge you to take a look at the clips for yourself. But I think she's described them well enough for us to move on. Importantly, it's not just Gonzalez who seemed to find his answer ridiculous. As the camera panned, several women sat with their arms folded. We mentioned that yesterday. One looking shocked when Trump claimed that no one was killed. I think the shock came from, one, remembering that, yes, people were killed, and then that he said nobody was killed, somebody was killed. It's actually the reverse. That he said Ashley Babbitt was killed, nobody was killed. And they were just flabbergasted at how you could say somebody was killed, nobody was killed, and just move on. CJ, DJ, they said I could call them either one. People were killed, people weren't killed. They said I could claim either one. Just one of his things. What I think we can see, Marcy says, in these two appearances was what happens when Harris has a chance to break through the disinformation that Trump has been spreading. Gonzalez and Mario Sigbaum, the guy who asked whether she had been installed undemocratically, came into the Harris town hall believing BS, let's say, that Trump had fed them. You know how, you know what the BS stands for, of course, right? Greg can tell you.
That's bullshit.
Right, exactly. That's it. Thank you. I always like to bring Greg in to do that work for you. But they came into the Harris town hall believing BS that Trump had fed them. The Biden administration was withholding relief from Republicans. Harris had pushed Biden aside and gotten herself installed undemocratically. I have no idea whether her appearance worked for Sigbaum, but in answering Sigbaum, Harris said things that Gonzalez would raise a week later with Trump, including that his former people were no longer supporting him. This is the task before Kamala Harris as more low-information voters head to the polls. She has to find a way to crack through the wave of disinformation that Trump has spread. These two clips show, I think, that when she has a chance to do that, either what she says or the references she makes or the empathy and leadership that she models can be successful in persuading people not just that she'll put their interests first, but that they've been lied to. To be fair, they're still getting lied to on social media. This week, for example, Christopher Rufo has been trying to seed claims that Kamala Harris plagiarized her book by cutting and pasting from a press release that the book cited. This, too, is a story we have skipped over to date, but Chris Rufo has had so much success that, with his thing, he tends to go back to the same playbook when something works, right? But he had so much success with removing and forcing out university presidents, Ivy League university presidents, with trumped up, no pun intended, plagiarism charges that everybody involved pretty much recognized, yeah, that's actually not plagiarism, what you're talking about there. And you're using like AI bots to scan over things and look to see whether, passages have been lifted, and then coming back with, 56%. It comes back with a 56% plagiarism score of this paragraph. Well, that's because that paragraph was citing another work. The citation is there. That's what protects you from charges of plagiarism. But we didn't scan the citation. We scanned the cited material. And it was a scam to begin with. So he thought, maybe I can run the same thing on Kamala Harris. After all, she too is a woman of color. So it must work on her, because every American believes, as I do, that women of color are stupid and cheaters. And if they're in positions of power, it's because they stole them. So he's running the same playbook. And again, saying, you plagiarized your book because, look, this paragraph is very, very similar to this paragraph in this previously published work. Yes, I know. That's why it's footnoted and cites the previous work. That's why you knew where to look for the other work. I told you where it came from. That's called not plagiarism. But anyway, he's trying to run it again. Many in the traditional press are still not telling the truth about Donald Trump, not about the guns his supporters brought to the Capitol, not about his obvious meltdowns, not about his criminal exposure. But Trump's public meltdown and his string of cancellations has finally titillated the chattering class, whose claim that Harris couldn't handle a tough interview was pretty soundly debunked by the Bret Baier interview on Fox News. Trump's own fitness has become an issue again, 8 years after the press got bored with that story, so they turned to Hillary's emails. And it became clear in the last week that Harris's events with Republicans have started to serve an additional purpose other than to give Republicans permission to support her. Though, to be clear, Gonzalez, the questioner, is the kind of self-identified Republican for whom that permission may be important. Those events and Harris's discussion of them are ways to describe how many Trump administration veterans, how many Republicans, have found him to be unfit. and have found him to be a fascist. They offer a credible way to make Trump's unfitness a story. It's the kind of story that may have helped to persuade Gonzalez. Again, I make no promises that this will work, and if it doesn't, we're looking at turnout and knowledge that Trump's planning that he's planning it anyway, even if we know only the half of what he's planned. But events of the last week may finally have stripped some of the curtain of lies that Trump hides behind. So I thought a good summation of events lately and the possible effect that they may have on the outcome of the race, and helpful for a Friday afternoon or Friday morning for us, but Friday afternoon maybe when you're listening to the podcast, certainly, and heading into the weekend. Okay, what other things did I put aside to share for you? Well, there's plenty. Let's see, sticking with the election and political material, and we may go all the way through on that, rather than bring you some of the more interesting, further afield stories on a Friday, but we'll try. Let's see. This one struck me when I put it aside yesterday, but I can't remember exactly what it was. Perhaps buried in the story, the headline doesn't tell it right off the bat, unless it reminds me along the way. From the HuffPost, Harris, Trump hit swing states as election day looms. Latest updates, it says here, but I feel like there was a more descriptive title before. Hopefully this will jog memory for us here. I didn't realize that this was one of those running latest updates things. I feel like, okay, if I scroll down, perhaps I'll hit a headline entered from yesterday that will remind me what we were looking at. But apparently the latest headlines from HuffPost include, let's see, one, Trump says a couple of people from Fox helped him with his Al Smith dinner speech. You remember they have that stupid event? And I guess he went and Harris didn't. And, I don't know whether that's supposed to be a traditionalist gasp that she passed up this opportunity to go and joke around in a bipartisan manner with the fascist who insists that he's going to turn the army loose on his political enemies next month. So, I think makes for a good boycott, if you ask me. But that wasn't what we put this one away for. And here is, let's see, a picture of him sitting with Melania. Politico reports Trump's interview cancellations have to do with, quote, exhaustion. And that's a nice excuse. J.D. Vance to take part in town hall hosted by News Nation's Chris Cuomo. Who cares? But that's there. Michelle Obama to rally with Harris in Detroit next weekend. That surely wasn't the one we put it aside for. Harris takes crack at Trump in video clip with Molly Shannon. I'm sure that's fun, but that probably wasn't it either. I don't know. Trump jokes that she sent a video to the Al Smith dinner in which she did this thing with Molly Shannon and the old SNL character Mary Catherine Gallagher. Might have been fun, I'm sure. Trump jokes that he's finally at a New York event without a subpoena. That was his joke for the Al Smith dinner. Is this it? Fox host Bret Baier says he played the wrong clip during combative Harris interview. So he says it was a big mistake. Sorry, we sent that doctored clip out over the television, and not the one we truly meant. I don't know if that was the one that we had put aside for or not. I think it's this. I think it has to go, or even earlier, because I'm pretty sure we did it during the afternoon. We're only back to 8:20 p.m. yesterday. Harris keeps hitting Trump for gaslighting Americans. Harris addressed Trump's Univision town hall where a voter challenged him to win back his vote. No, all right. It could be this one. Judge will release more January 6th evidence on Friday. I wonder if that was it. And we're still awaiting that one. Let's see. Anything else? There was her shutdown of hecklers. Of course, January 6th rioters had guns at the Capitol. Here's more proof. That's a good headline, but that wasn't it either. All right. Well, unfortunately, these things don't stay static. And I didn't realize that I was putting a bookmark in for one of these continually updated feeds. I'll see if I can't. Yeah, it's really not jumping out here. But, no, Elon Musk, we covered that yesterday, though. All right, well, we'll have to jump back out of this and see whether the memory is jogged in some other way. But, of course, HuffPost has us now stuck there with the pinwheel of death, so we can't even jump back to Pocket. Here we go. Perhaps we now have permission to go back to our own saved articles. Geez. And see what we've got for you. Here's something that I thought was of interest, also spotted this morning, along with a few other related stories. Let's see. NBC News' headline here, an AI-powered bot army on Twitter is spreading pro-Trump and pro-GOP propaganda, research shows. It's not just a feeling. And this, yes, goes hand in hand with an apparent recent change in the terms of service for Twitter, which I found really interesting as well. What I didn't put aside, but spotted in discussion online, was, among other things, Twitter now declares that the jurisdiction in which they will claim, I guess, residency and such that any federal questions or lawsuits that arise between users and the company will be settled in the Northern District of Texas, and in particular, where what's the judge there? Reed O'Connor, is that the name of the judge? Who, like the other one, Kaczmarek, is the only or nearly the only judge in the district. And this particular judge, by the way, in addition to being very pro-Republican, pro-Trump, and pro-Elon Musk, and pro-Twitter, is also a known significant shareholder of Twitter and is taking all their cases nonetheless. So very interesting. And a part of the terms of service include, apparently, now it is a violation of the terms of service for the researchers who did work like that cited here, which exposed a sizable AI-powered bot army spreading pro-Trump propaganda. Now, if you download the bulk of information that would be needed from Twitter, where it used to be permissible to prove something like this, if you do it now it's a violation of the terms of service and they will sue you. So pretty cool. The bot network supported Republican candidates in states like Ohio and Pennsylvania and boosted North Carolina's Republican-led voter identification law, says the subheader here. Kevin Collier is the reporter for NBC, responsible for this piece. An army of political propaganda accounts powered by artificial intelligence posed as real people on X, you know it as Twitter, to argue in favor of Republican candidates and causes, according to a research report out of Clemson University, you know, that liberal northeastern bastion. The report details a coordinated AI campaign using large language models, or LLM, not a doctor of, or master of letters degree, but the large language model. The type of artificial intelligence that powers convincing human-seeming chatbots like ChatGPT to reply to other users. While it's unclear who operated or funded the network, its focus on particular political pet projects with no clear connection to foreign countries indicates it's an American political operation rather than one run by a foreign government, the researchers said. As the November elections near, the government and other watchdogs have warned of efforts to influence public opinion via AI-generated content. The presence of a seemingly coordinated domestic influence operation using AI adds yet another wrinkle to a rapidly developing and chaotic information landscape. The network identified by the Clemson researchers included at least 686 identified Twitter accounts that have posted more than 130,000 times since January. It seems like you could be posting more, I suppose, but that's still quite a bit. I don't know what the numbers come out to. Since January, it's a lot of days. But okay, it's targeted 4 Senate races and 2 primary races and supported former President Donald Trump's re-election campaign. Many of the accounts were removed from Twitter after NBC News emailed the platform for comment. The platform did not respond to NBC News' inquiry. The accounts followed a consistent pattern, Many had profile pictures that appealed to conservatives, like the far-right cartoon meme, Pepe the Frog, remember that one, a cross or an American flag, or a cross wrapped in an American flag, perhaps. They frequently replied to a person talking about a politician or a polarizing political issue on Twitter, often to support Republican candidates or policies, or denigrate Democratic candidates. While the accounts generally had few followers, their practice of replying to more popular posters made it more likely they'd be seen. Fake accounts and bots designed to artificially boost other accounts have plagued social media platforms for years, but it's only with the advent of widely available large language models in late 2022 that it has really been possible to automate convincing, interactive human conversations at scale. I am concerned about what this campaign shows is possible. Darren Linville, the co-director of Clemson's Media Hub and the lead researcher on the study, told NBC News, bad actors are just learning how to do this now. They're definitely going to get better at it. The accounts took distinct positions on certain races. In the Ohio Republican Senate primary, they supported Frank LaRose over Trump-backed Bernie Moreno. In Arizona's Republican congressional primary, the accounts supported Blake Masters over Abraham Hamida. Both Masters and Hamida were supported by Trump over 4 other GOP candidates. The network also supported the Republican nominee in Senate races in Montana, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, as well as North Carolina's Republican-led voter identification law. A spokesperson for Hamida, who won the primary in July, told NBC News that the campaign noticed an influx of messages criticizing Hamida whenever he posted on Twitter, but didn't know who to report the phenomenon to or how to stop them. Twitter offers users an option to report misuse of the platform, like spam, but its policies don't explicitly prohibit AI-driven fake accounts. The researchers determined that the accounts were in the same network by assessing metadata and tracking the contents of their replies and the accounts that they replied to. Sometimes the accounts repeatedly attacked the same targets together. Clemson researchers identified many accounts in the network via text in their posts that indicated that they had, quote, broken, where their text included reference to being written by AI. Initially, the bots appeared to use ChatGPT, one of the most tightly controlled LLMs. In a post tagging Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, one of the accounts wrote, "Hey there, I'm an AI language model trained by OpenAI. If you have any questions or need further assistance, feel free to ask." OpenAI declined to comment. In June, the network reflected that it was using Dolphin, a smaller model designed to circumvent restrictions like those on ChatGPT, which prohibits using its product to mislead others. Oh well. In some tweets from the account, text would be included with phrases like, "Dolphin here," and "Dolphin, the uncensored AI tweet writer." So identifying itself that way. Kai-Cheng Yang, a postdoctoral researcher at Northeastern University who studies misuse of generative AI, but was not involved with Clemson's research, reviewed the findings at NBC News' request, and in an interview he supported the findings and methodology, noting that the accounts often included a rare tell. Unlike real people, they often made up hashtags to go with their posts. They include a lot of hashtags, but those hashtags are not necessarily the ones people are using, said Yang. Like when you ask ChatGPT to write you a tweet, and it will include made-up hashtags. In one post supporting LaRose in the Ohio Republican Senate primary, for instance, the hashtag Vote Frank LaRose was used. Not unusual, right? A search on Twitter for that hashtag shows only one other tweet from 2018 had ever used it. That's kind of a giveaway. The researchers only found evidence of the campaign on Twitter. Elon Musk, the platform's owner, pledged upon taking over in 2022 to eliminate bots and fake accounts from the platform, but Musk also oversaw deep cuts when he took over the company, then called Twitter. I still call it that, which included parts of its trust and safety teams. It's not clear exactly how the campaign automated the process of generating the posting content on Twitter, but multiple consumer products allow for similar types of automation. And publicly available tutorials explain how to set up such an operation. So it's not like they hacked it or anything. The reports say that, or the report says that the part of the reason it believed that the network is an American operation is because of its hyper-specific support of some Republican campaigns. Documented foreign propaganda campaigns consistently reflect priorities from those countries. China opposes U.S. support for Taiwan. Iran opposes Trump's candidacy in general, and Russia supports Trump and opposes U.S. aid to Ukraine. All three of these have for years denigrated the U.S. democratic process and tried to stoke general discord via social media propaganda campaigns. All of those actors are driven by their own goals and agenda, Linville said. This is most likely a domestic actor because of the specificity of most of the targeting. If the network is American, it likely isn't legal, said Larry Norden, a vice president of the Elections and Government Program at NYU's Brennan Center for Justice, a progressive nonprofit group, the author of a recent analysis of state election AI laws. There's really not a lot of regulation in this space, especially at the federal level, Norden said. Nothing new in the law right now that requires a bot to identify itself as a bot. There's nothing in there at the moment. If a super PAC were to hire a marketing firm or operative to run such a bot farm, it wouldn't necessarily appear as such on its disclosure forms, Norden said, potentially coming from a staffer or a vendor. While the United States government has taken repeated actions to neuter deceitful foreign propaganda operations aimed at swaying Americans' political opinion, the U.S. intelligence community generally does not plan to combat U.S.-based disinformation operations. Social media platforms routinely purge coordinated fake personas when they accuse of coming from government propaganda networks, particularly those of China, Iran, and Russia, but whereas those operations have at times hired hundreds of employees to write fake content, AI now allows most of that process to be automated. Often those fake accounts struggle to gain an organic following before they are detected, but the network detected by Clemson's researchers tapped into existing follower networks by replying to larger accounts. LLM technology also could aid in avoiding detection by allowing for quick generation of new content rather than copying and pasting. While Clemson's is the first clearly documented network that systematically uses LLMs to reply and shape political conversations, there is evidence that others are also using AI in propaganda campaigns on Twitter. In a press call in September about foreign operations to influence the election, a U.S. intelligence official said that Iran and especially Russia's online propaganda efforts have included tasking AI bots to reply to users, though the official declined to speak on the scale of those efforts or share additional details. All right, this and more as we take our break. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So there was just a little bit left of that NBC article that we were just reading. You remember where we were a minute ago. In a press call in September about foreign operations to influence the election, U.S. officials said that, yes, the other countries, too, are moving towards using AI bots to reply to users, though there wasn't much detail offered. Then Dolphins founder Eric Hartford told NBC News that he believes the technology should reflect the values of whoever uses it. That seems like a useless comment. LLMs are just a tool, like lighters and knives and cars and phones and computers and a chainsaw and a gun, you might say. We don't expect chainsaws to only work on trees, right? That sounds like that's the sort of what was it? There was a Martin Short character, the lawyer on 60 Minutes, the nervous guy with the cigarette. I know that. You think I don't know that? It's so funny that you think I don't know that. Well, we don't expect these things to only be used on trees, right? Well, yeah, we kind of do. Can they be used for murder? Sure. There's a whole series of movies about it. But, do we hold chainsaw companies responsible for that? Well, no, but it is sort of a different kind of product. Anyway, he says, I'm producing a tool that can be used for good and for evil. He said, terrific. Why don't you not? Hartford said that he was unsurprised that someone used this model for a deceptive political campaign. I would say that's just a natural outcome of the existence of this technology and inevitable, he said. But as there are no positive use cases for the technology, maybe just don't develop the technology. All right, I'm sure there are some positive use cases for it. Anyway, just thought that was interesting, and as I said, in conjunction with the change in the terms of service, are there any news stories about that? Let's see if we can. I guess. Well, the thing is, you can't. It's hard to search for things about X because X is it's one letter. It's very difficult as a search term when you're searching the news. But let's see. Socialmediatoday.com had something. X updates terms of service. I'm going to load slow. To more explicitly cover AI training permissions. Right, that too. You used to be able to opt out of allowing your content posted on Twitter to be used for AI bot training. And that is apparently no longer the case. But what I should have been looking for is the name of the judge and his use in steering. Oh, here we are. Musk's X seeks to steer lawsuits to conservative court this is a Reuters report, in Texas. All right, why not read this one, or at least a little bit of this blurb to make sure that we know what the state of the situation is. Elon Musk's X has updated its terms of service to steer any disputes by users of the social media platform formerly known as Twitter to a federal court in Texas whose judges frequently deliver victories to conservative litigants in political cases. New terms of service that will take effect November 15th specify that any lawsuits against X by users must be exclusively filed in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas or state courts in Tarrant County, Texas. It is common for companies to include venue clauses in their terms of service directing what forum would hear any disputes filed against them, but the choice of the Northern District of Texas stands out because Twitter is not actually located in that district. It's usually the case that you will say all complaints have to be filed in the jurisdiction where our headquarters are. Something like that, but not just a place that is typically favorable to us. Following a move from San Francisco, X is today headquartered in Bastrop, Texas, Bastrop, near Austin, whose federal court is Texas's Western District. The Western District has far fewer Republican-appointed judges, though, than the Northern District. The Northern District has become a favored destination for conservative activists and business groups to pursue lawsuits seeking to block parts of Democratic President Joe Biden's agenda, a tactic Democratic lawmakers say smacks of judge shopping. It is judge shopping. It doesn't smack of it. It's hard to imagine that's unrelated to this new language, said Stephen Vladeck, law professor at Georgetown University. The company didn't respond to a request for comment. Musk, the world's richest man, has increasingly embraced conservative causes and has become a major financial supporter of Republican President Donald Trump in his campaign to win the November 5th presidential election, in case you hadn't heard of it. Texas's Northern District is already the host of 2 lawsuits Twitter has filed after several brands pulled ads from Musk's platform, including one against liberal watchdog group Media Matters after it published a report that said ads appeared next to posts supporting Nazism. Twitter, which billionaire Musk bought in 2022, sued Media Matters last year, alleging the group defamed the platform. The lawsuit is set for trial in Fort Worth, Texas next year. Media Matters has called the lawsuit meritless. X has also filed an antitrust lawsuit accusing several advertisers of conspiring to stage a boycott, causing it to lose revenue. Both of the lawsuits were initially assigned to U.S. District Judge Reed O'Connor, a Fort Worth judge who once declared the Obamacare health insurance law unconstitutional in a ruling that was later overturned. He has since blocked Biden administration policies on gun control and LGBTQ rights. The judge, an appointee of Republican former President George W. Bush, stepped aside, though, from X's antitrust case in August after National Public Radio reported that financial disclosure reports showed O'Connor had owned shares of another Musk company, Tesla. But the judge, so he's not a Twitter shareholder, but a Tesla shareholder. But it's been pretty amply demonstrated the weird and possibly even illegal interweaving of and connection between Musk's companies, and he frequently borrows personnel and funding and all sorts of other things, technologies in between the 2, 3, 5 companies that he owns, whatever number it is now. Anyway, the judge has declined to recuse himself from the Media Matters case for some strange reason. O'Connor is one of 2 active judges in Fort Worth's federal courthouse. The other is Mark Pittman, a Trump appointee. So, you know, the odds are pretty good if you are forcing people to file their cases there. But it wouldn't ordinarily have jurisdiction over such cases. But hey, what the hell? Let's try it anyway. Maybe the world's richest man will be able to get away with some shenanigans that the rest of you would never be entitled to. Who knows? All right. Well, we'll mark that for inclusion in the roundup and head back to Pocket and bring you some of the other stories that I felt I wanted to share. This one we've heard before from a slightly different source and angle. But just to remind you, in case you missed our original reading of the story years ago and a repeat of the story a couple years later, told from the perspective of the video editors of the original season of The Apprentice, telling us the story of how heavily edited The Apprentice was and how it was very clearly the aim of the project to create a character, essentially, out of Donald Trump and portray him as a wildly successful businessman, which is actually not the truth of what went on. But more importantly, I thought the editors were saying that their first go-round of finished products for the first season were edited differently, and they were ordered back to edit the material differently and create a very different kind of show. It was the editor's impression, given that the footage that they had been handed and what they thought was the stated goal of the show, they edited the thing very differently. And they came out, they thought they were editing a comedy program that parodied, high-powered businessmen like Trump and the way they did business, and that it was meant to make it look like Donald Trump was a buffoon and only an idiot would run a business this way, and that he was that idiot, that he was full of bluster, he was full of crap, generally speaking, and didn't have any real idea how to run a business, but loved to make people think that he did, and loved, the comedy of the show was this a-hole won't stop talking about himself in glowing terms. Everybody asks me how I could be such a genius. Everybody asks me what a brilliant, how did I become so brilliant? How did I make such great decisions? And it was a running joke. But they were actually ordered back to the drawing board and said, no, we want this to look like he really is a business genius. And they had a hell of a time coming up with the show. They didn't really know how to do it in ways that they didn't recognize as parody. But eventually they got versions of it past the producers, who said, all right, we think people will believe the bluster rather than laugh at the bluster. Anyway, this is a slightly different approach to a similar story. We created a monster. Trump was a TV fantasy invented for The Apprentice. NBC's former chief marketer speaking here and regrets selling an illusion that has had dire consequences for the world. Absolutely. John D. Miller is the contributor in question here. I want to apologize to America. He begins, I helped create a monster. By the way, this ran just the other day, October 16th. Okay. For nearly 25 years, I led marketing at NBC and NBC Universal. I led the team that marketed The Apprentice, the reality show, which isn't really reality, that made Donald Trump a household name outside of New York City, where he was better known for overextending his empire and appearing in celebrity gossip columns. To sell the show, we created the narrative that Trump was a super successful businessman who lived like royalty. That was the conceit of the show. At the very least, it was a substantial exaggeration. At worst, it created a false narrative by making him seem more successful than he was. Okay, in general, I think we all knew that, but here's some more specifics. In fact, Trump, of course, declared business bankruptcy 4 times before the show went into production, and at least twice more during his 14 seasons hosting. And really, 14 seasons in a row. I mean, they do bring this point up later on, but who has that kind of time? Certainly not a successful businessman, right? The imposing boardroom where he famously fired contestants was a set because his real boardroom was too old and shabby for TV. Trump may have been the perfect choice of the boss to be the boss of this show because more successful CEOs were too busy to get involved in reality TV and didn't want to hire random game show winners into their executive teams, right? Because they were afraid they'd wreck their business. These people don't know anything. Trump had no such concerns. Interestingly enough, he had plenty of time for filming. He loved the attention, and it painted a positive picture of him that wasn't true. At NBC, we promoted the show relentlessly. Thousands of 30-second promo spots that spread the fantasy of Trump's supposed business acumen were beamed over the airwaves to nearly every household in the country. The image of Trump that we promoted was highly exaggerated. In its own way, it was fake news that we spread over America like a heavy snowstorm. I never imagined that the picture we painted of Trump as a successful businessman would help catapult him to the White House. I discovered in my interactions with him over the years that he is manipulative, yet extraordinarily easy to manipulate. By the way, why only speaking up at this late date? I don't know. He has an unfillable compliment hole. Is that what they call it? The compliment hole? No amount is too much. Flatter him and he is compliant. World leaders, including apparently Russian strongman Vladimir Putin and North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, have discovered that too. I also found Trump remarkably thin-skinned. By the way, interesting that Kim Jong-un gets described as dictator. He is. But that Russian strongman Vladimir Putin, I mean, he's a dictator too. You could just say it. He's actually flattered by being called strongman, like Trump would be. Anyway, I also found Trump remarkably thin-skinned. He aggressively goes after those who critique him and seeks retribution. That's not very businesslike, and certainly not presidential. This week, he threatened to use the National Guard against Americans who oppose him, calling them the enemy from within, even though Fox News tried to pretend he did not. I learned early on in my dealings with Trump that he thought he could simply say something over and over, and eventually people would believe it. He would say to me, "The Apprentice, America's #1 TV show." But it wasn't. Not that week, not that season. I had the ratings in front of me. He had seen and heard the ratings, but that didn't matter. He just kept saying it was the #1 show on television, even after we corrected him. He repeated it on press tours, too, knowing full well it was wrong. He didn't like being fact-checked back then, either. Actually, there's a whole tangent this could take me on, which I'm not prepared to do today, and we don't probably have time for it. But I recently read, and where I cannot recall, and somebody probably referred me to this, and I'm trying to think of who it was, whether it was a correspondent of ours like Jeremy Freiberger possibly, or did Scott come up with this, or did I just see it on one of the social media feeds that I frequently interact with? But mentioning, maybe that was it, Don Moynihan, something like that, possibly. I don't know. Anyway, whoever it was, thank you very much for bringing it to my attention. Not that I prepared to present it to you, but I had heard this a couple of times, and I'd heard accusations like this one, that he just thought that saying something like this over and over again would make it true. And it has roots. And it has roots in the old-timey self-help book, I guess, is mostly how people think of it, but apparently it's much more insidious than that. But leave it to Trump to be sort of locked in this old-timey frame of mind, that the self-help book that he chose to pattern his life on is The Power of Positive Thinking, which, it is old-timey, but it actually predates the 70s through 90s when he sort of formulated his worldview and locked himself in. I didn't realize how old the book was, but I think it was actually published in the 50s at first. And it's the sort of title that makes it sound like maybe kind of harmless, like, positive thinking, that'll help you through your day. But apparently it's really much more insidious than that, and was written by a guy who was an infamous, like, ultra right-wing preacher as well. And that this was the basis of his ministry, essentially. But the power of positive thinking in itself, it sounds like a harmless enough book, but apparently if you actually read it, it's really more about like self-hypnosis than anything else, where it's not, have positive thoughts during the day and do a daily affirmation and you'll feel better about yourself and go on to have a nice day. No, it's more about repeat this stuff to yourself. Just make yourself believe these things to be true. And it's all reflected in Trump's approach to everything, including just repeating over and over again that he's got the number one show on television, or that he's got the biggest crowds ever, or all these things that he convinces himself of that you think is just weirdo bluster may apparently be sort of mental breakdown under self-hypnosis. It's a very interesting review of the nature of the book, and addresses the fact that most people just sort of think of it as a nice throwaway, pop psychology kind of a thing, but that it was much more insidious than that. We should find that, dig that up, and read that for you on some future Friday. Anyway, back to this piece here. Exaggerating ratings is one thing, but spreading falsehoods about relief work of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or about immigrants eating cats and dogs, about the deadly COVID-19 pandemic, about him winning the 2020 election, or countless other lies is far more dangerous. I also learned from working with him, our author continues, that he has questionable judgment at the wrap party for The Apprentice Season 3. He pitched an idea for the upcoming season. He told me we should make a team of black players compete against white players. My first thought was, WTF. I tried to get through to him by speaking the language he understands, money. I explained that sponsors wouldn't want to be associated with a show that pitted the races against each other, but he could not understand why this was such a bad idea. And no, we did not use his idea. While we were successful in marketing The Apprentice, we also did irreparable harm by creating the false image of Trump as a successful leader. I deeply regret that, and I regret that it has taken me so long to go public. I'm glad he regrets it, but he doesn't explain it. Now America is facing a critical choice. Should this elderly would-be emperor with no clothes, who is well known for stretching and abandoning the truth, be president again? I spent 50 years successfully promoting television magic, making mountains out of molehills every day. But I say now to my fellow Americans, without any promotional exaggeration, if you believe that Trump will be better for you or for the country, doesn't matter which, that is an illusion, much like The Apprentice was. If you are a born and bred Republican, as I was, I strongly urge you to vote for Kamala Harris, even if you are. The country will be better off, and so will you. Okay, I don't know whether he believes himself to be beyond Trump's targeting at this point. He's not. So I guess in some sense there's still some bravery to coming forward, but could have used your help a while ago on that one. But still, I thought some interesting observations and worth making and adding to the discourse here. Did I put anything out in Pocket about the power of positive thinking? I thought I might have, and it might have been buried by now, though. But I might have to go and look this stuff up again. And maybe I can at least grab a couple of these things and have them included in the roundup. A couple of extraneous bits here that I also wanted to include. And I have to open up some of these. Right. Yeah. Well, okay. Just checking to see whether these need to be included before we close things out for Friday. There are. Here's an additional warning that I think you gotta know about. This is sad state of affairs here, reported by Wired. Can I read this whole thing? Yeah, I guess I can access it all. DHS, Department of Homeland Security, warns law enforcement around the country, election deniers may attempt to bomb ballot drop boxes. You know, that they think that they're extraordinarily crooked and 2,000 mules and yada yada, and that they're used for fraud, and so therefore it would be okay to bomb a ballot drop box because the only people you'll kill are liars for the Democrats anyway, because we're not going to use them, which, you know, may weirdly backfire for them, but in a number of ways. But yeah, sad state of affairs. In a series of reports reviewed by Wired, analysts at the Department of Homeland Security warn of a heightened risk of right-wing extremists carrying out attacks around the election, one of which is the worry that they will bomb drop boxes. Oh my. You know, it's probably not worth spending the time reading over the article itself, but just to sort of put the warning out there that this is where we've landed on Trump's rhetoric inspiring terrorism in the United States, targeting the integrity of our elections and seeking to essentially implant in them the idea that they'll be striking a blow for freedom by bombing ballot boxes, either by killing people who are actually attempting to vote, which would be pretty blatant on the fascism scale, or just destroying a large number of ballots that they think will be overwhelmingly in favor of Harris for whatever reason. And they might even be right about that. But how will we deal with that? That's actually something to think about. What if thousands of votes are cast that are critical to the outcome of an election, or would be critical to the outcome of an election in a swing state, but the box is blown up? They really have to be monitoring these things pretty carefully. And I guess it argues for emptying the boxes pretty quickly and bringing the ballots to secure locations. But I suppose that's the easiest target, but who knows whether they won't rise to the level of bombing counting centers as well. We really have to be on the lookout for this stuff. And as I said yesterday, if your two choices are prison or the presidency, what does it matter to you if you pull blatantly illegal stunts, up to and including terrorist acts, to try to change the outcome of the count in the election? If I can't change the actual outcome of people's determinations, how they want to cast their ballots, I can at least blow up enough ballots or places where they count ballots to change the outcome, delay the outcome long enough for me to claim that something is being rigged, even though I'm rigging it by murdering people left and right. Oh, that's illegal. I could end up in jail. I could end up dying in prison. Well, that's already true. So tell me about a downside before I make this decision. You got 10 seconds to come up with something that's going to dissuade me from committing more crimes. Wow. Well, that got dark pretty quick. And, of course, here is a Washington Post entry from Aaron Blake, just sort of taking note of the fact in the headline here that Trump drops the pretense and labels January 6th insurrectionists as we, as he did in the Univision appearance, just making note of mainstream press making note of the fact that he did that. It's not just us weirdos out here analyzing things. Here is a Friday-ish kind of a story. Oh, that's right. We got our last break coming up. So I'll save it for the last segment. But that'll also give me an opportunity over the 2-minute break to see if I can look around and find more information about the power of positive thinking and the background of the guy who wrote it to try to make this point. But I want to try and see if I can find the social media post that brought it to my attention, if that's where it came from. But, man, here's something that I kind of wanted to share at some point. I'll share it after the break because it's a little bit more of a lengthy read, but just something that happened prior to my conscious awareness, I guess, of politics, and it stretches back kind of ways. So some of you who are slightly older will say, oh, yeah, how do you not know that? Or it never occurred to me that there were people who didn't remember this. But actually by now it's probably occurring to you because this is a good 50 years ago, nearly, that we're, I guess 50, that we're talking about. So you can spend the time between now and then trying to guess at what I'm going to be pointing to here. But let's see, other things that we might be able to sneak in just in between now and the break. I don't know. Everything's kind of a long read at this point. But let's see. Oh, here's something that's a semi-quick read. I don't know, and just a good news piece here. Not overtly political. The flu shot is different this year. Greg could probably tell us about how and why. Thanks to COVID. Who would have thought? Sarah Bowden reporting this for NPR. And just quickly let you know that this year's flu shot will be missing a particular strain of influenza that it's protected against for more than a decade. Why did they take it out? That's because there have been no confirmed flu cases caused by this particular strain, influenza B Yamagata lineage, apparently. Not one I'm familiar with. But there have been none since the spring of 2020. And the FDA has decided this year that the strain now poses little to no threat to human health. Scientists have concluded that widespread physical distancing and masking practiced during the early days of COVID appear to have pushed the influenza B Yamagata strain into oblivion. This surprised many who study the flu, as it would be the first documented instance of a virus going extinct due to changes in human behavior. How do you like that? Good job, everyone. Thumbs up. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Just trying to check in on whether or not the appendices have, in fact, already been released by Tanya Chutkin to see whether, I think it's still waiting to be unsealed, or at least nobody has written about it to this point. But I'm sure there are reporters waiting for the release at the courthouse, and we'll see how momentous it really is and whether it motivates any special editions of the show. But for closing out the show today, I have a couple of things that we'll try and rush through and get on the record, and we'll have to skip around a little bit, I'm sure. The old political reference that I was referring to is the obituary that appears, or the report of the death, anyway, I don't know if this is the actual obituary here, in the New York Times just the other day of one Megan Marshack. Does it ring a bell for anyone? It did not for me. Megan Marshack dies at age 70. The hook here is, in the headline, that she was with Nelson Rockefeller at his death, which doesn't tell you a great deal of the story all by itself, but hints at something to go. She, says the subheader, was at the center of rumors about the former vice president's last moments. Wink, wink. But she remained silent about their association until she wrote her own obituary. Now, Nelson Rockefeller has been dead for a very long time. She has just died at age 70, which gives you some indication of how young she really was when she was involved in the events that made her semi-famous, infamous. But I had missed this entire episode because it was, like I said, before my real political consciousness, particularly about people who were formerly vice presidents. Like in 1979, I was pretty well aware of, who was president, why, what the issues were that were swirling around. And that was like, I don't know, 6th grade or so, 1979. But, I wasn't paying attention to details like this. Sometimes people ask, well, what was your first, political memory? When were you first remember being aware of the fact that there even was politics in the world versus, I want what flavor of lollipop am I interested in after I get a haircut or something like that. And I do pretty clearly remember being in 3rd grade and that the elections of 1976 were on the table and that kids talked about the fact, it was November, a new school year. Oh yeah, there's an election coming up. And I remember that there were, kids who very clearly came from households that were going to be Republican voters. I remember, though, comments being made about how ridiculous it was that Jimmy Carter could possibly win the presidency. He was just some dopey peanut farmer. And, of course, he had been governor of Georgia. So, there was a little bit more to the picture. But as kids, I don't know. For some reason, it was extremely funny to us that, a peanut farmer could become president of the United States. Yeah, well, kind of, sort of, yes. At any rate, also, nuclear submarine engineer in the Navy, governor of Georgia, a few other items on the guy's agenda. Anyway, he's still alive and voting. So how do you like that? But I remember also a little bit earlier, for instance, I remember that during the 1976 presidential primaries. So I guess going back into late 1975 and into early 1976, that, Carter hadn't yet won the nomination. And I remember, for instance, that my father was a supporter of Senator Frank Church, who comes up every once in a while in conversations with Joan because Idaho. And, I don't remember a great deal about it, though I do understand why that was the case and what it was that made Frank Church particularly prominent at the time. But, I guess that would probably be my first political memory, for instance, I guess. I don't know. But at any rate, this one escaped my notice about Meghan Marshack. And now she's dead. So I missed the whole thing. Alex Traub writes this piece on October 15th. Meghan Marshack, who as a young aide to Nelson A. Rockefeller, found herself at the center of sensational conjecture about the circumstances of his sudden death in 1979. She herself died on October 2nd in Sacramento. She was 70. Her death at a live-in medical facility was announced in an obituary that her brother, John Marshack, said she had written herself last year, and it was posted by a Sacramento funeral home on its website. Mr. Marshack, her sole immediate survivor, said the cause was liver and kidney failure. The obituary represented Ms. Marshack's first public comment about Mr. Rockefeller, the former Republican vice president and New York governor, since she witnessed his death, also at 70, by the way, on January 26, 1979. So just one, we want to sort of set the stage here. Let's see. She was 70 in 2024. Math, I got to check. 2024, 70 years old. So born in 54, so 64, 74, 25 years old when she witnessed the death of the 70-year-old former vice president. When we say witnessed the death, well, that could mean anything. How so? Ms. Marshack, who was widely believed to have been romantically involved with Mr. Rockefeller, had for decades remained silent about the circumstances of his death. He at 70, she at 25, for whatever reason, there for the death. In its aftermath, she found herself in the odd position of a journalist avoiding journalists. As an editor of syndicated television news, she wished not to be in the spotlight herself, but reporters followed her on the street and even into the subway, hoping she would say something about Mr. Rockefeller's last night. Miss Marshack's self-written obituary disclosed some previously unreported details about her association with Rockefeller, but did not mention a romance, although it ended suggestively, quoting from the 1975 musical A Chorus Line. She, too, had her life locked in for her in the 70s. Ms. Marshack wrote that she, quote, won't forget, can't regret what I did for love. And I've seen that show. I remember what that was about, and wow, okay. The initial account for love, right? The initial account of Mr. Rockefeller's death was supplied by Hugh Morrow, his longtime spokesman, after midnight on January 27th. He told the New York Times that Mr. Rockefeller had died instantly at 10:15 p.m. while he was in his office, alone with a bodyguard, quote, having a wonderful time, unquote, but having a wonderful time working on an art book that he was writing. The next day, the Times began deconstructing the official story. The paper reported that someone called 911 to report Mr. Rockefeller's death an hour after he was reported to have died, that Mr. Rockefeller was not at his office, but rather at a brownstone that he used as a clubhouse. And that struck me as odd, and I mean, maybe it wasn't as odd then, but like clubhouse? What do you mean clubhouse? Like a political clubs had? Yeah, but I mean, a clubhouse just seems like an odd phrasing that wouldn't be used the same way today. Maybe an obsolete practice. Anyway, I suspect that it was more than a clubhouse, and that at the time that he was with Ms. Marshack, who was identified as a research assistant, and she may very well have been, a drip of revelations ensued. First, the Times reported that it was Ms. Marshack who called 911. Then, the paper said that the caller had actually been a friend of hers who lived in the same apartment building as Ms. Marshack, down the block from Rockefeller's brownstone, the clubhouse, right? It also turned out that Rockefeller had given Ms. Marshack the money for her apartment, a loan amounting to $45,000, maybe for other purposes, or I don't know whether that was for the apartment, or whether that was an apartment plus a loan of $45,000, which is about $200,000 in today's money, which he forgave in his will, along with other loans to top aides. And I mean, I don't think they're implying anything there, but I'm sure at the time people thought it was awfully suspicious that he loaned her $45,000, forgave it in the will, maybe let her know that that was going to be the case, and then boom, he suddenly dies. Well, that's not actually the focus of this piece here. The writer Alexander Cockburn praised the Times in the Washington Post for its excellent coverage. Others disagreed. The establishment press discarded traditional notions of privacy, and keyhole journalism was redefined as the public's right to know. Richard Norton Smith wrote in the 2014 biography, On His Own Terms, A Life of Nelson Rockefeller. New York's tabloid newspapers wrote about Ms. Marshack almost daily and referred to her in headlines by her first name. She has forever been labeled the woman who was there, the Washington Post wrote in a profile. The circumstances of Mr. Rockefeller's death remain mysterious. One account said that he was found dead wearing a suit and tie and surrounded by working papers. Another said that he was nude, which is the total opposite of that, amid containers of Chinese food. Several credible sources indicated that he did not actually die at his brownstone, but rather at Ms. Marshack's apartment. The cause of death is generally understood to have been a heart attack. But imagine just sort of leaving it there these days, right? Well, some say he was fully dressed in a suit and tie surrounded by working papers in his clubhouse. Others say he was at a young woman's apartment, totally nude and surrounded by containers of Chinese food. Well, we're out of time. We'll just have to leave it there. Aside from the minimal statements confirming that this is a vice president of the United States, by the way. I mean, not at the time, but I mean, not that long before, 1979. Anyway, aside from minimal statements confirming that she had indeed been with Mr. Rockefeller when he died, released to the Times by Mr. Morrow immediately after Mr. Rockefeller's death, Ms. Marshack never publicly commented on any of the accounts. My understanding is that after she passed away, she signed a non-disclosure agreement with the family at their request, and that's why she never spoke of it. Ms. Marshack's brother said in an interview, "I think she had a desire to tell the story all along, but held on to her obligation." And that's nice. In February of 1979, 4 of Mr. Rockefeller's children released a joint statement saying that Ms. Marshack did her best to save him and expressing regret for errors in the announcement of his death. Ms. Marshack was born on October 31st, 1953 in Los Angeles. She and her brother were adopted from separate families as infants and grew up in the Sherman Oaks neighborhood. She was given the name Megan Ruth Marshack. Her father, Sidney Marshack, was an aerospace engineer, and her mother, Credwin, or Patricia Marshack, taught piano at their home. Very traditional. Ms. Marshack studied history and journalism at the California State University Northridge and graduated in 1975. She was in the midst of a 6-month reporting tryout for the Associated Press in 1975 when, at 22 years of age, she was assigned to attend a news conference in L.A. held by Mr. Rockefeller, who was then vice president, with the aim of asking him specifically about the financial crisis then threatening New York City. Mr. Rockefeller, addressing issues concerning Latin America, was answering questions in Spanish. How do you like that? By her account, Ms. Marshack decided to break in, saying, "Señor Vicepresidente." "Un momento, por favor," Mr. Rockefeller said. "No, ahora, por favor," Ms. Marshack replied. "Sí?" Mr. Rockefeller asked. "Now, about New York City," Ms. Marshack continued. The room broke out in laughter. When the news conference ended, she and the vice president walked out together. After learning that she would not get a full-time position at the AP, Ms. Marshack applied to be a press aide to Mr. Rockefeller in Washington. Knowing that he loved Oreo cookies, she showed up for her job interview with a tray of them, each individually wrapped, each tied with a bow. Wow. That's initiative for you. She got the job and was charged with writing letters that he wanted to sign personally. The duty granted her an office with a private entrance to his. President Gerald R. Ford chose to drop Mr. Rockefeller from the 1976 presidential ticket in favor of Senator Bob Dole of Kansas. When Mr. Rockefeller's term ended, he brought Ms. Marshack and other aides back to his home office in New York City. Most of them addressed him as governor. Ms. Marshack called him Nelson. In interviews with Mr. Smith for his book, Rockefeller Associates said it was an open secret that Rockefeller and Marshack were having an affair. He was married at the time to Margaretta Rockefeller, who was known as Happy. Was she? All right. In an article published in the San Fernando Valley News just days before his death, Ms. Marshack was quoted as calling Mr. Rockefeller the most caring man and considerate boss I've met. In the early 1980s, Ms. Marshack worked in the news syndication department of CBS and was involved in the coverage of events including the 1984 Winter Olympics in Sarajevo, the former Yugoslavia, and the trial of Mehmet Ali Agca in the attempted assassination of Pope John Paul II. In 1998, she moved to Placerville, I don't know how they pronounce it in California, you tell me, for a job with the Mountain Democrat local newspaper. She married a colleague, Edmund Jacoby Jr., in 2003. He died just last year after sustaining injuries in a car accident. Years earlier, Ms. Marshack moved to Sacramento to be closer to her brother. Closing moments of this story here, Mr. Marshack said he never asked his sister about what happened with Rockefeller. Lori Nadell, friend from CBS, who became a psychotherapist and author, said in an interview that her literary agent once predicted that she could get Ms. Marshack an advance of $1 million for a tell-all memoir. Those days have come and gone. I guess no one cares anymore. Ms. Marshack took a lunch meeting with the agent but decided she did not want to take money off this tragedy, Dr. Nadell said. When Ms. Marshack was dying, Dr. Nadell offered to listen to everything she had to say about Mr. Rockefeller and act as the posthumous bearer of the tale, but Ms. Marshack declined. In an email, Dr. Nadell wrote, "I feel what Megan, quote, did for love was keep it private in her heart rather than reveal intimate details that could later become fodder for cruel jokes." Well, that's really something. What a story, and one that I just had no idea about, and I don't know, seemed like a good Friday edition. Maybe you were well aware of it and have known it for years, and oh yeah, I remember her, and that could be interesting all in its own right. And if you've never heard that story, well, why not? Well, let's add it to the political lore. Okay, there are a couple of other items that I thought I might be able to sneak in here, and maybe this one will end the show with, that Scott sent to me from Time Magazine. Probably a good idea to keep this stuff in mind if Pocket will actually show me the piece here. Here we go. Slow in reacting, but something to keep in mind in terms of the stakes of the election. Once again, and I know you need no more excuses not to allow Donald Trump to seize power in any way, shape, or form. But here's another one, regardless. Doomsday and Democracy, it's titled here. Former Trump aides warn of secret presidential crisis powers. This piece written by Brian Bennett, and begins this way. Locked away in a classified safe on the White House grounds is a stack of papers crafted over decades with the hope that no one would ever use them. It lists the extraordinary powers a president may be authorized to use in the event of a nuclear attack or other massive catastrophe. I'll just add here, undoubtedly written with someone other than Donald Trump in mind. Among the select few who have been granted access to the nation's most closely held secrets, the pages are known as the Presidential Emergency Action Documents, or PEADs. Some simply call it the Doomsday Book. Over the decades, the book has come to include ready-made orders to suspend habeas corpus, the ancient and bedrock principle that those arrested appear before a judge, put parts of the country under military control, impose martial law, block Americans from traveling overseas, and restrict telecommunications, according to conversations with national security officials and analysis of the documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act filings by the Brennan Center for Justice. The public doesn't know the extent of those presumed powers or the situations under which a president might claim the authority to deploy them. Successive administrations have refused to let Congress see the documents, arguing that they are confidential legal advice for the president. When Donald Trump was in the Oval Office, members of his national security staff actively worked to keep him from learning the full extent of these interpretations of presidential authority, concerned that he would abuse them. Imagine that finding out what the actual powers of the presidency could be would entice him to simply say, well, aren't we in that emergency now? He would have no understanding of what would actually have to happen in order to trigger this stuff. And you might even be right that there's nothing that stands in the way if you asked this Supreme Court that question. Anyway, now some former Trump advisors are raising the alarm about the dangers of Trump having access to the Doomsday Book in a second term. The former officials, which include Mark Harvey, who oversaw the Doomsday Book while on Trump's National Security Council, and Miles Taylor, a former chief of staff for Trump's Department of Homeland Security, they worry that Trump would use the powers in situations that far fall short of the crises they were drafted to address. Trump has a history of testing the limits, I would say, and I would have put that in quotes, testing the limits of presidential powers, and in a second term would be free of many of the guardrails that restricted his first one. The Supreme Court ruled in July that presidents have partial immunity for official actions. Trump's senior advisors have a plan to purge the federal service of people unwilling to carry out his orders. He's going to be surrounded with a set of people who would say, you have the power to do this, says Harvey. Frankly, if he says yes and there are people that go do it, what's to stop him? But to use these powers, a president is expected to have a genuine emergency that justifies their use, say two former White House lawyers familiar with the draft documents. The draft orders in the Doomsday Book are written for truly extraordinary situations that have debilitated the federal government or Congress and require the president to ensure the continuity of government, according to former White House lawyers. Now, of course, what if the president himself debilitates the federal government or Congress? And then says, boom, now we have reason to use this stuff. Or I've debilitated the federal government. I have yet to debilitate Congress, but why don't I grab the Doomsday Book and invoke some of those powers in order to further debilitate the branches of government that still exist? If a president overstated the crisis, the order could be struck down in court, like eventually 10 years from then. The last time the book was revised was during the Obama administration, and the Biden administration is currently reviewing it, says a person familiar with the documents. The Trump campaign declined to comment for this story, which is based on interviews with more than a dozen national security officials from the current and previous administrations, including 5 from Trump's first term. By the way, when you're talking about nobody gives a crap about the laws anymore because what are they going to do to you and presidents have immunity, I guess one of the things you could be reviewing it for right now, the Biden administration is reviewing it. Here's my review of it. If it looks at all like Trump might either win the election or somehow successfully seize power despite losing the election, burn the book. Destroy it completely. Don't leave it behind. Oh, but that's somehow wildly illegal. Yeah, well, it's an official act. Prosecute me. I'm 81 years old and, the Supreme Court just ruled that I could do this. Yes, they won't actually allow me to do it. They would only allow Trump to do it or some other Republican. Sure, fine. But I'm certainly not going to leave this around as a game plan. Besides which, if you know where to look, there's probably another copy. Let's just hope that he doesn't know where to look. But why not? Just destroy the thing on the way out. I mean, if they're sacking the White House to install him in power, you might as well just burn it and say, I didn't do it. Trump people threw a firebomb and it landed in the safe. Whoops, I had the safe open at the time. Sorry. It was all a big mistake. But if it was an official mistake. So, I don't know. I'd view that as an option at this point. Where did we leave off with this? It's hard to have a public debate. He goes into this about presidential authorities that aren't fully known. And that's an interesting possibility, too. It just occurred to me. If you actually destroyed the book, Trump could then, of course, if he were then to successfully seize power, there'd be nothing to stop him anyway. So it's not really like, oh, well, it's your fault for destroying the book. But then he could just say, oh, yeah, the book said I had the right to rape anybody I feel like. It could be anything. Or I can pass out girls to my friends. No, it probably didn't say that. But the fact that the book isn't around was never going to establish that he couldn't just seize that power anyway. So, it's hard to believe or hard to have a public debate about presidential authorities that aren't fully known, which is why some of the public's representatives are working to learn more as well as to fence in what any president can do in extreme emergencies, be it Trump, his 2024 opponent, Vice President Kamala Harris, or some future power-hungry commander-in-chief. Are we saying that Kamala Harris is one of those? That's not fair. I think it's just unfortunate phrasing. A bipartisan group of senators, Republicans Rand Paul of Kentucky, you might expect that he might do this, and Mike Lee of Utah, and Democrats Richard Blumenthal and Chris Murphy of Connecticut are pressing for more detail about what's in the draft orders, when they can be used, and what legal theories justify them. Paul has requested the White House let him read the PEADs in a classified setting, but it was denied. At least he says he was denied. That is alarming to us, and we'd like to know more about them. Paul tells Time that the idea that we would have emergency orders written up to replace the constitutional republic in times of emergencies, that would alarm anybody. The draft presidential orders are kept locked in a sensitive compartmented information facility at the White House, a SCIF, right? And electronically on a highly restricted server, destroy that too, according to 2 former federal officials familiar with how such documents are stored. Some of the draft orders have blank spaces for filling in details like the date and circumstances for a power to be used, those people said. Makes some sense. White House officials sometimes refer to them during classified tabletop exercises, acting out how the government would respond in an overwhelming disaster. Their authorities derive from long-standing laws like the Insurrection Act of 1807, one of Trump's favorites, the Communications Act of 1934, the National Emergencies Act of 1976, and the Immigration and Nationality Act, as well as secret Justice Department legal interpretations of inherent presidential constitutional powers, says Elizabeth Gotein, I hope, maybe, an expert on national security law at the Brennan Center for Justice. If you want to look her up, it's Goitein. No idea how you would pronounce it, though. Since World War II, presidents of both parties have increasingly laid claim to a vast reservoir of latent constitutional emergency powers, she says. Everything about these documents is completely shrouded in secrecy, so there's no oversight. My concern is the president will act in ways that are inconsistent and irreconcilable, not only with individual liberties as guaranteed by the Constitution, but by democracy itself, which is just a constant worry with Trump, regardless of these documents. For all the campaign year rhetoric, sober or otherwise, about Trump becoming a dictator, the Doomsday Book contains an actual menu of real-world options for how a commander-in-chief could dramatically extend the powers of the presidency based on decades of legal interpretation by lawyers in multiple administrations. The pages are the physical distillation of the extraordinary trust placed in presidents by the American people. It's an old and outdated model at this point, I would say, who assume that such authority will be used responsibly and temporarily to shepherd the country through an existential crisis. Now, Trump is constantly saying that there's existential crises left and right in this country, and not, though, to perpetuate personal power or revenge. During his first term, Trump repeatedly demonstrated a willingness to push the limits of presidential powers, often for his own political advantage. He diverted military funding to building parts of the border wall. He tried to hold hostage hundreds of millions of dollars in security aid to pressure Ukraine to investigate his political rivals. He also repeatedly pushed the Justice Department to pursue those he viewed as enemies. He then launched an insurrection on January 6th, of course. When Trump has signaled support for military tribunals for political enemies like Liz Cheney, for example, he undermines the confidence Americans have in the rule of law, says H.R. McMaster, who actually served as national security advisor during Trump's first year in office. The decision by Oliver Cromwell to use the military to form a new British government in 1653 was on the minds of the American founders when they designed the separation of powers, McMaster said. Our founders really set up a bold line, between the military and politics for good reason. All right, time for us to play the music and get the hell out of here. But you get the idea of what's in the offing. They can't really discuss the details because no one has actually seen these things, but it does give you reason to worry a little bit and perhaps finish up the reading of this piece by yourself on your own over the weekend. I highly recommend it. I'm going to take a look at it as soon as we're done on the air here, because it's time for us to go now. We're a little bit behind on this as it is. Justice Putnam awaits in the wings with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, bringing you probably not only another look at the stories we did touch on, but some that we had to skip over or missed entirely today. Like, for instance, Jack Smith might just use Trump's words against him in court after Trump directly linked himself to the January 6th insurrectionists in a statement on Univision's town hall. On the rest of his menu today, the Oregon election phone lines had to be closed after a flood of out-of-state MAGA conspiracy calls overwhelmed the system. Hey, they're flooding the zone too. A federal judge in Florida ordered the DeSantis administration to stop threatening TV stations with criminal charges if they run ads in support of an abortion rights referendum. Gee whiz, I hope it sticks. And Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has filed a lawsuit against a Dallas doctor for violating the state's ban on gender-affirming care. Wow. What about internationally? There's news there, too. Let's see if we can't sneak this in after these brief words.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
What important words those were. Now, the international roundup. An early morning blaze burned down a brand new fire station in Germany that, lacked fire alarms. Why would you put them in a fire station? No, yeah. And the youngest woman to climb all of the world's 14 tallest peaks calls for novices to be regulated. Seems like a good idea. We'll see you next week.